All right, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for joining us for today's webinar on the New York State Historic Barn Rehabilitation Tax Credit. So let me give everyone just a few moments to file in, make sure everyone gets in the room all right. Today, we're going to be joined by Olivia Brazee from the State Historic Preservation Office, and she'll be walking us through the ins and outs of the Historic Tax Credit Program in New York State. All right, I'll give you all a few more seconds. Last time I looked, we had 96 people signed up for today's session. So I'm happy to see all of you coming in. We've got 40-some in the room so far. So I'll give you all another half minute or so, and then we'll get started. So as you're coming in, I just want to mention a couple of things. Today's webinar is being recorded. So if you can't stay for the whole time, or friends who wanted to be here today and couldn't, it will be available for later viewing on our website. And tomorrow, you all will receive a follow-up email with a link to this webinar. All right, so we have questions coming in already. So before we get started, let me just address this one question, asking if this is for new restorations only. So the Historic Tax Credit Program is for repair and rehabilitation of agricultural outbuildings and barns. So restoration isn't necessary. Repairs and rehabs. Hope I got that right, Olivia.
Yeah, and also there was the word new. So the barn tax credit program allows for claiming a credit on work that was done within a 5-year window prior to claiming. So if you've already done a project in the last 5-ish years, you may qualify as well.
Excellent. All right. All right, I think a majority of us are here, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, we're joined today by Olivia Brazee from the State Historic Preservation Office. My name is Janna Rudler. I'm the Grants and Technical Services Manager at the Preservation League of New York State. If you have called the Preservation League in the past looking for advice on how to restore or rehabilitate your barn, you probably spoke with me and received some information. So we may be going over things that you've heard before, but most of this should be new. So today's program is sponsored by the American Planning Association's New York Upstate chapter. So we're offering a certificate maintenance credit for planning, for planners, and continuing ed credit for architects. So if you're here looking for these credits, please send me a chat sometime during the program with your name, email address, and whether you are a planner or an architect. And we will be, architects will receive a certificate for your own reporting, and then the planners, we will report your attendance on your behalf. So be sure and let me know if you're here for any of those credits. Again, we're recording today's program, so it'll be available on our website for later viewing. At the end of the program, we'll have a live Q&A session when I'll allow you all to unmute and ask your questions, but please feel free to post questions anytime in the Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end of the program. So the Preservation League of New York State is the organization that I'm with, and if you're not familiar with who we are the nonprofit working across New York State for historic preservation. We work through a number of programs in all 62 counties of New York State. We offer technical assistance, which is what you get when you call me and ask me about your barns. We offer financial incentives in the form of grants, and these are for nonprofits and municipalities. We work with our preservation colleagues all across the state. So these are the local groups working for historic preservation, such as Preservation Long Island, Preservation Buffalo Niagara, PACNY, PAST, and ARCH up in the Adirondacks, and everything in between. So we certainly enjoy working with our colleagues and helping to advance historic preservation on a local level that way. We offer excellence awards for noteworthy preservation projects, and we are taking nominations on our website now. So if you know of any excellent preservation projects, people working for historic preservation who deserve recognition, let us know and nominate them today. We protect threatened resources through our 7 to Save programs. So these are a biannual list of endangered properties across New York State. And if you check out our website, you'll see features on all 7 to Save for the next 2 years. And finally, we work locally, nationally, and at the state level to affect public policy to be sure that historic preservation always has a seat at the table when it comes to sustainable economic growth and smart community revitalization. This is actually my last slide. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Olivia Brazee. So Olivia, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Janna. My name is Olivia Brazee, and I'm with the Division for Historic Preservation at the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. I'm excited to be with you all here today to talk about the new barn tax credit program that we have. And thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. So just a little bit about my office. So as I said, I'm with the Division for Historic Preservation of the State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And we're located just north of Albany in Peebles Island State Park. I am with the Technical Services Unit within the DHP. So what I do is I basically review projects under state and federal preservation laws. I also review tax credit applications for the federal rehabilitation tax credit program for commercial properties, which some of you may already be familiar with. So also within the DHP, Division for Historic Preservation, we have the Community Preservation Services Bureau, which encompasses the National Register Program, the Certified Local Government Program, as well as our grants program. The homeowner tax credit program is situated within the Community Services Preservation or Community Preservation Services Bureau. Some of you also may be familiar with the homeowner tax credit program. So we have Community Preservation Services. We have the Technical Preservation Services Bureau that I'm in, which also includes the Archaeological Unit. And we also have the Bureau of Historic Sites. And we do have some 80 some odd historic sites across the state, and our Bureau staff help to provide technical assistance and collections management and interpretation for those historic sites. So that's an overview of my office, who we are and what we do, what programs we offer. As you'll note, I mentioned at least 2 other tax credit programs. So tax credits have been the primary tool that preservationists have been using since the 1970s to help advance the cause of preserving historic buildings and sites. So with that, I will segue into my PowerPoint and dive right into the major requirements for the barn tax credit program. And let's now see if I can meet the challenge of sharing my screen. All right. Maybe Janna, you can tell me if my PowerPoint is available.
I see it.
Visible, great. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, now I will put it in presentation mode. Slideshow. Okay, so we're just going to dive right into the program requirements. Some of you may have seen this information before, and we can certainly go over a lot of this in more detail during the Q&A at the end. So basically, the program is a 25% tax credit against New York State income tax that you owe, and it's 25% of the amount that you spend to rehabilitate a barn. And the barn must have been built before 1946. If it was built after 1946 and also happens to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places, it can also qualify. It must be a barn, and our definition of barn is pretty broad. Your project must be at least $5,000 or more in order to qualify for the tax credit program. The barn cannot be converted into a residence under this program, and also cannot have been used as a residence within 1 year prior to applying for the program. And the rehabilitation project that you do must not alter the historic appearance of the barn. Now, I will say a note about that. That is a pretty broad requirement, and we interpret it pretty flexibly. So as I mentioned at the outset, in response to somebody's question, it is also a program that allows for retroactive approval of work that's already been done. And that's work that was done within a 5-year window prior to filing for the tax credit. So you still need to submit the application form and need to get approval from our office. But if you've done work within a 5-year window prior to trying to claim the tax credit, you can still be eligible for claiming the tax credit. I don't know if I covered the first one, but you do need to be a New York State taxpayer in order to be eligible for the program. All right, so I thought it would be helpful to go over the application form itself, which we hope is simple enough to navigate. We modeled it on the homeowner tax credit application that our office uses. So if some of you have, happen to have a home that's listed in the National Register, you may have already taken advantage of the homeowner tax credit program. But basically, the application is a 3-part application. Part 1 and 2, basically, you're asked to provide your contact information and a checklist showing that the project qualifies, meeting the major eligibility requirements of the program. You're asked to include photos of the barn, interior and exterior, all areas of work, detail photos if relevant. We also ask that if you allow us, we can use the photos that you submit of your barn in promotional materials. I'll make a note that all the photos in this presentation that I'm using came from the Library of Congress, HAB's collection of barn photos in New York State. So public domain photos, but I chose some interesting ones from different eras to illustrate, the New York State's rural heritage in architecture. So the Part 1 and 2 form is submitted first if you haven't done your work already. And it includes a project worksheet on the second page that asks you to describe basically the condition of your barn and the type of work you're doing. So an example would be, standing seam metal roof is severely deteriorated. Proposed work is to replace the standing seam metal roof with a new standing seam metal roof. And you would ideally, you'd write, whatever photo numbers in the left-hand column that correspond with your photos showing the roof, and you would give an estimated cost. It's okay if you don't know at the outset of your project just exactly how much you'll be spending. Aside from the major requirement that you're going to be spending at least $5,000. We don't ask that you submit contractor invoices with your application materials, but it's always advisable to keep those on hand as part of your tax records in case you do get audited. So once we've received your Part 1/2 application and we've approved it, then you can begin your project. Oops, I went a little too fast there. Then you basically complete your project and you submit the Part 3 form. So this on the right-hand side of my screen is just a clip of part of the Part 3 form, which again asks you for your contact information and photos of the completed work. If you've already done your whole project and you're ready to submit your application, but you did the work already, you still need to submit Parts 1 and 2 and along with Part 3 all together, but you only need to fill in the project worksheet for the Part 3 form, which describes the work that you did do. So right. At this point, I think what I want to do is take you all to the website to show you where to find the application form. So I'm going to jump out of my presentation for a minute here. So I hope you all can see I'm on the tax credit program website or page of our website. here on the right hand of our website, you have all the options for the different programs information there. The tax credit programs page is the one that we're on, and it includes information on all of our tax credit programs, and the barn tax credit application form and instructions and information sheet are frequently asked questions page are all at the very bottom of the website, or of this web page rather. So you basically can, navigate here, download the PDF application form. So here's the part 1 and 2 form. And as I said, we also have an FAQ sheet, which looks like this. It's a 1-pager at this point, but we're probably going to be adding more FAQs to it as we get questions from folks. And then the instruction sheet for how to fill out your barn tax credit application. Here's the instruction sheet. So now I'm going to jump back into my presentation. Sorry if this is a little jumping around. Let's see. All right, so the point I want to make about the instruction sheet is that at the end of it, it includes a not quite exhaustive list of qualifying rehabilitation expenditures. So the types of work that you do to your barn to rehabilitate it that you can claim the credit on. And then below that is a list of non-qualifying rehabilitation expenditures. So things like fencing around the barn, outdoor lighting that might not be attached to the barn. That's the type of work or the type of expenditure that can't be claimed for the tax credit. And we can go into that in more detail in the Q&A. And this is our FAQ sheet with some of the questions that we've already been getting from a lot of people who are interested in applying for the barn tax credit program. And so that's basically the application form and the major program requirements. Some of you probably know that we already had a barn tax credit program dating back to 1997. That program was running up until 2017, and I can bore people with the details if they want to know, but basically when the new federal tax code took effect in 2018, it had a trickle-down effect to our state tax law that effectively gutted the barn tax credit program and made it available only to barns that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, which the vast majority of barns in New York State are not listed. So as soon as that happened, we had a much reduced program. We started working to restore the program and make it available to all barns again. So that was a bit of a long process. And we certainly had the help of elected officials. State Senator Michelle Hinchy and State Assembly Member Dee Dee Barrett worked hard to introduce legislation to essentially reestablish the barn tax credit, resulting in the new legislation getting signed in December of last year by Governor Hochul. So it previously was a 25% state tax credit. It still is. The definition of barn became a little bit broader in the new legislation. And that really highlights, how we look at this tax credit program as, our goal with the program is to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And it certainly aligns with our, statewide preservation plan goal of working towards, finding effective financial incentives for rural and agricultural buildings. So that was the background for how we got to where we are today with the new tax credit program. And so that was my overview. So, and here I wanted to show you again, here's our website. And here's the link to the tax credit page that I showed you before, where you can find the barn tax credit application and other informational materials.
Olivia,
yep, go ahead.
Is it possible for you to put that URL in the chat for people?
Yes, it is. And I thought about that, and I will do that.
Thank you.
I think I have to X out of my presentation view. But basically, I also wanted to share my contact information, which I can also put in the chat as well, but here it is. So there we are. We can start Q&A.
Great.
And
We've had,
I guess I should share. Yeah, keep sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
All right. We've had quite a few questions come in, so we'll work our way through them one by one. Benjamin's asking if work will take more than 1 year, can the credit be requested pro rata each year, or can the credit only be requested once it is fully completed?
So that's a good question. You need to have completed a project in order to get approval or final certification so that you can claim the tax credit. But there is the ability to claim a new tax credit each year. So you can apply multiple times. If you submit an application this year and you expect to have your work done this year, but maybe it doesn't get done this year, it rolls into 2023, your application remains open into 2023. Say you complete your project in 2023, that's the year in which you can receive certification from our office and the year in which the tax year in which you claim the credit. I hope that makes sense.
We have a related question as well, asking if we did several projects, each of which was under $5,000, but the total was over $5,000, would this qualify?
Yes. Yep. You would bundle all your projects into one application, and that would receive approval. Mm-hmm.
Great. And the question of whether applications should be submitted electronically or by hard copy and mailed in.
That's a good question. We are currently asking for hard copy mailing. We expect that we'll have online submission available sometime soon, and that's something we're working towards making available for our homeowner tax credit program as well as online submission. So, but currently it is hard copy. So that's, yeah, the answer to that question.
Okay, great. So what kind of documentation is required to provide proof that the barn was constructed before 1946?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So we typically just start with the photos that you submit of your barn. And those are usually going to be enough for us to, ballpark date the barn. If we look at the photos of your barn and we scratch our heads and we say, not sure, that looks like it might have been built around 1946 or after, we will work with the applicant to find documentation to demonstrate or to document the date. So the short answer is you're not required to provide documentation other than current photos of the barn. But if there's a question, then we will basically help you figure it out through historic aerial photography, historic maps, trying to identify if the barn stood on that site, before 1946 or if it didn't. So. Okay.
And does the barn have to be located in a qualifying census tract in order to be eligible?
Nope. There is no such requirement for this program, so it's open to statewide, all barns.
Great. So we have a question about being a New York State taxpayer. We have some folks who are Pennsylvania residents, but they own property in Ulster County. Would that property qualify?
Unfortunately, you have to be a New York State taxpayer in order to claim the credit.
Okay, and that is an income tax.
It is an income tax credit, yep. So you have to owe income tax in New York State.
Okay. How about urban carriage houses? Do those qualify?
Carriage houses do qualify.
Ooh, great. All right. Let's see. And we have a question about the deadline for applying for this tax credit for this year.
Okay. Oh, the deadline. Yes. So we would ask that you submit your application basically before December of this year, so that we have at least 30 days to review it. If you do submit at the end of November, we'd have at least 30 days to review it and issue a certification. Our certifications, the year that we issue the certification is the year that you're able to claim the credit for. Okay. And 2022 is the first year that it's possible to claim the credit for.
Okay. And how long does it take to find out if you're approved for tax credits?
Oh, 30 days.
Oh, 30 days. Okay.
Oh, well, so I should clarify. So approval of your application by our office is always going to happen within 30 calendar days, if not sooner. what happens when you receive approval from our office? When you receive final approval on your part 3, you basically receive a certification from our office, and you then take that certification and you attach it to your tax credit filing form. So there's a specific barn tax credit filing form that the Department of Taxation and Finance has. They have not made the 2022 form available yet. It's going to be released this summer for the new barn tax credit program. So does that answer fully answer the question? I mean, but basically you would need to go ahead and file your taxes, and then you would, whenever you hear back, you would receive a credit.
Okay, great. I think you did answer her question. Thanks. Okay, so I'm working my way through the chat and the Q&A for questions. So there's a lot of questions. Let's see. Work that changes the historic appearance of the barn does not qualify. So does this include the internal appearance of the barn?
It does. So we, the purpose of, the program and the way we look at rehabilitation is that the character of the barn, interior and exterior, needs to remain substantially the same, and that for barns means an exposed structure on the interior. So if you were to propose furring out the entire interior of your barn, your project wouldn't qualify.
Okay, and we have some scenarios being proposed that you may have just answered the question to some of those, but we have a 1905 Wells barn that was converted to a residence. Does that qualify?
Well, the specific program regulations state that if the barn is being used as a residence within 1 year before applying for the credit, it does not qualify. And if the other regulation that's salient is if the project converts the barn to a residence, it does not qualify. So it sounds like this barn wouldn't qualify because I'm assuming it's still in residential use.
Mm-hmm. And how about if the eventual use of the barn would be a bar/restaurant?
So the regulations are not specific about types of uses that are allowed, with the exception of no residential use being called out. It's more about the changes made to the barn, that might be made to the barn in relation to whatever the proposed use is. So it would depend on what those physical changes would be to convert the barn to a bar. It's possible that it could be done in a sensitive manner that would meet the program requirements, retaining a substantial amount of the interior structure exposed, not adding lots of new windows, things like that.
Okay, and I have a related question. A barn that's been converted to an art studio and gallery with an area set up to allow an artist to stay overnight while using the studio. It includes a bed, bath, and kitchen, and they're wondering if that disqualifies the barn.
Well, I will say that when it's something like that, it will be a case-by-case review, based on how we look at what is the existing barn, what's its appearance, what is the result of that change on the appearance of the barn. So it would be a case-by-case review. So it's not an automatic ruling out, but it's also not an automatic yes. It would really depend on how much of the barn would be, renovated to be used for an artist residence, and how that, renovation changes the appearance of the barn. So it's possible, but we would need to look at the details and the photos.
Okay. So if there are 2 barns in a single qualifying property, would each rehabilitation be managed separately as a separate project?
No, you can submit one application form for 2 separate structures. So if you have 2 barns, you're renovating both, you can show that in one application form.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And how about other agricultural structures such as drying sheds, machine sheds, silos, and such?
Right. So agricultural outbuildings qualify for the program as well.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Golly, we've got a lot of questions, so bear with me a moment while I make
Sure.
sure that we
Yeah,
haven't
sure.
missed anything. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, trying to keep the theme consistent. Um, let's see. So we've got a couple contractor questions. Now, someone asked if we could recommend any contractors, and I know that we're not really able to provide a statewide list from the Preservation League. Olivia, I'll let you speak to this question as well.
Well, we as a state agency, unfortunately, are not allowed to make recommendations.
Mhm.
I mean, we often, the first thing we often do when we get that question, which we get a lot, is refer people to the Preservation League and to Janna.
Mhm.
Another helpful piece of information is, local groups, sometimes have that local knowledge, whether it's a historical society or some other type of nonprofit that really knows the area. So.
Sure. And actually, I might as well pop on so I can help answer this question as well. While we don't have a list of contractors exactly, we do have a resource called the Timber Framers Guild, and we provide a link to that. You'll, I should probably put that in the chat. And they have a contractor finder tool on their website that can help you. But like Olivia said, we often refer people to their local preservation nonprofits to get local recommendations. We also have a question. My son is a contractor. If he doesn't charge his usual full price, can it still be counted as in-kind expenses?
Yeah, so that it sounds like those costs would be eligible. If you are the barn owner and you do the work yourself, so owner labor, that's not a qualifying expenditure. But if you are paying somebody, whatever you're paying them to do the actual rehab work would qualify. It doesn't matter if the contractor happens to be a relative.
Okay. All right. And does one have to meet the MBWE contractor goals for projects?
Oh, no.
No. Okay.
No.
All right. Let's see where we're at with questions in the chat. Okay, as a contractor who only works on barns all over Western New York, can they submit applications on behalf of their customers or in conjunction with them?
Yes. The only requirement is that the barn owner has to sign the application form, but it can be filled out by somebody else.
Okay, great. And we have a couple of questions referring to the tax credit itself. Can the credit be used for individual or corporate tax or only for itemized forms?
That's a question I unfortunately can't answer. I'm not a tax professional. I would refer you also to our FAQ sheet on our website, which does address, this is information we got directly from Tax and Finance. It does address S corporations, but none of this is my expertise. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to say I can't answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We did have a couple of questions about historic registries, whether the barn has to be state or federally registered with the Historical Society. There's no such requirement.
Nope.
All right. Someone mentioned the New York State Barn Coalition as being a possible source for contractors. So that's a good suggestion there. Let's see, we have a question. Can we submit multiple applications for different projects over time? For example, doing the roofing and then the walls, foundational and electrical work separately?
Yes, you would just need to meet the program requirements with each new project. You'd need to meet the $5,000 minimum with each project, each application.
Okay, great. And we have a suggestion also from Megan that if you're in the Rochester, Genesee Valley or Finger Lakes area, you can reach out to the Landmark Society of Western New York for contractor recommendations as well. So that's a good suggestion as well. Let's see, we have a question about grants. If we're aware of any grants that could be applied to help offset renovation costs.
Unfortunately, no, there are no state grants for barns. Our office, as I mentioned, does have a grant program. It's not specific to barns, it's to any National Register listed property. And there are a slew of other requirements for grant recipients. But there used to be a barn grant program that started around the year 2000 that New York State did offer grant money upfront for barn rehabilitation or restoration. That program, I think the funding was exhausted and it was discontinued as a result. So.
Okay, yep, the grant programs tend to come and go, so it's always good to check every couple of years. And what if a person doesn't owe any taxes after their deductions?
So if you don't owe anything, you can carry forward the tax credit amount 10 years. So if the next year you do owe state income tax, you'd be able to use your tax credit that year or the next year.
Okay, and how about a not-for-profit 501c3 historical organization? Is there any way they can qualify for this benefit?
Again, that's a question that's best left to a financial professional. It would depend on the tax filing status of that entity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and how about the costs incurred in moving an old barn to a new location?
So we have gotten that question before, and we would call moving costs, or that moving costs would qualify. We would need to review where the barn is being moved to, and we'd need to approve that site that it would be moved to in order for the project to qualify. But assuming we would approve that, the expenses would be qualified.
Okay. All right. And a question about the amount of tax credits. So how much of a tax credit do you get, for instance, if the expenses, the qualifying rehabilitation expenses are $40,000?
25% of $40,000 would be the amount of your credit. So 1/4 of $40,000 is $10,000, I believe. Did I do my math right?
All right. Yeah, math's not my strong point either.
Oh, neither mine, neither mine.
Let's see. And so what about previous modifications that were made to the structure? Are there previous or existing modifications that would disqualify the barn as a candidate for tax credits?
No, whatever condition existing conditions on a barn are considered grandfathered conditions. So you're allowed to retain whatever existing conditions there are.
Wow, that's good.
That wouldn't disqualify. I mean, it's obviously if you've done a project on your barn, say you did a project 4 years ago, you made those changes yourself, you're trying to claim the tax credit for those changes, we would need to review and approve those changes. But if the changes that were made, are not relevant to your project, it wouldn't disqualify it.
Okay. All right. So we have a question also about a project where they have a barn and an adjacent milk house. They've spent more than $5,000 total on rehab projects, although less than $5,000 on each. Would this qualify to meet the $5,000 minimum?
Yes, it would qualify.
Great. All right. Let's see, we had a question about the significance of 1946. Can you explain that?
Yep, that's a good question. So we have historians in-house in our National Register unit that we consulted with to determine an appropriate cutoff date. And we determined 1946 was an appropriate cutoff date based on the construction technology and methodology of barns and the materials. That there really was a change, in the World War II period between traditional timber framing and balloon framing construction of barns into using different technologies and systems like much larger metal shed, truss supported structures, things like that. So that's how we landed on the date. I will say in the previous iteration of the barn tax credit program, the cutoff date had been 1936. And that was based purely on the 1986 federal tax code that or federal tax credit tax code that made the tax credit available to properties 50 years of age or older. So it was in 1986 that this federal legislation was passed, and it said, let's look back and capture buildings 50 years of age or more, and that was automatically 1936. And when this goes back to my explanation of kind of how the barn tax credit, the state barn tax credit got kind of messed up by the new federal tax code in 2018. But basically, when our barn tax credit legislation was first written in the 90s, language was pulled directly from the federal tax code, and that's how we basically pulled that from the federal language about tax credits. And so we got our 1936 date initially from there. That's
Okay.
kind of a long explanation, but it is 1946 currently.
Great. Now we had a couple of questions about the form itself. I'm not sure, Olivia, if you can go back to part
Yes.
1 of your
Yes.
form. Yeah, so the third bullet in the first part, there's a question about what that means exactly. And if you can share also how to become historically registered. Let me see, third bullet. Is it currently or was it originally used as an agricultural facility? I think that's what she's referring to. Molly, if you want to clarify your question, but she's asking about that third bullet point.
So the third bullet, so the question, is it currently or was it originally used as an agricultural facility or for purposes related to agriculture? That comes directly from the language of the legislation that was passed and signed into law in December 2021, which I think I included here. So this little clip at the bottom of my slide shows the actual language of the bill, the barn tax credit bill. So that's the definition we have. It's pretty broad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think actually she clarified she was actually referring to the state or national register. So in part 1 there, it refers to
is the barn a contributing state or national register listed property?
Exactly.
So that question, if you're not sure, please contact me and I'm happy to help you answer that question. As I noted, most barns are not listed in the National Register. This is looking statewide. If you know that you already live in a National Register listed historic district, for example, your barn most likely would be considered a contributing structure to that listed historic district. If you're some barn owners who have applied for the credit or who are interested in taking the credit under the new program do have individually listed farm properties. So their property in its entirety is listed in the National Register. And those barns are typically contributing to that National Register listed property. So the answer there would be yes. We do have our website known as the CRIS website, the Cultural Resources Information System website, which is a GIS-based or a map-based website. You can punch in your address and the map will zoom to your address and you can see whether or not your property is listed in the National Register. So it's possible to look it up. It is public information on our website. If you need help navigating our website to find that information, I'm happy to do that.
Great. Okay. And Molly, did that answer your question? I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute if you want to speak. Okay, and if anybody needs to speak their question, if that would be easier, there's a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you. So Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. I believe you answered it. I will probably reach out to you just offline just to clarify my particular property. So
Sure.
Thank you. This has all been very helpful.
Yep, sure.
Okay. Let's see. Olivia, is it possible to put the URL for CRIS up?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking I should just do that. Yeah. So.
Okay, and that's something the Preservation League can help too. Part of our technical services. I've helped a lot of people look up their properties on CRIS. So if you have questions, you can contact Olivia or you can contact me about that as well. All right. So I think I think we've gone through all the questions. I'm going to take one more run through. We have a new question. Okay, so the barn in question is has an the oldest section is timber framed. There's an addition that was balloon framed. The date of that addition is not known, although it appears to be before 1946. The proposed projects would be a full re-roofing, and the existing roof is corrugated metal. Can a full re-roofing be done, and what might those restrictions be?
Yep, full re-roofing would be eligible. If the historic roofing material is known, that could help determine, what the replacement roofing should be. But typically, like I said, a standing seam metal roof is typically approvable for most barns, or a shingle, asphalt shingle roof, if it's known that originally the barn had, wood shingles, for example. I mean, it's we make some attempts to understand what the historic material of the barn roof was in order to inform, decision about the replacement material. But often it's not known, what the original roofing material was, and so at that point we can, go from what is the existing roofing material, and its replacement in kind is fine.
All right. Okay. Just looking through the questions one more time, make sure we haven't missed anything. So can the barn be restored to be used eventually for commercial purposes?
So again, we aren't looking at what the proposed use is, except to the, or only to the extent that, what changes will be made in support of that proposed use. So it really just depends on what renovations those might be, and whether or not we consider them to, either not historically, or not alter the historic appearance of the barn, or if they're going to alter the historic appearance of the barn, then that wouldn't qualify.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Feel free to post them in the Q&A. If you'd rather speak your question, feel free to click the raise hand button on your screen, and I'd be happy to unmute you so you can talk. Looking through, see if there's any other questions. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen. The last slide that I have has got some contact information for the Preservation League of New York State. On our website, we do have a barn preservation page. It's got some of the links that we've mentioned. So for the New York State Barn Coalition, the Timber Framers Guild link is on that page as well. So feel free to visit our website to find these resources, or you can contact me directly and I'd be happy to send you a whole list of resources. Some of you already have. All right, looking at the Q&A again, I believe we've had no new questions. So if any questions do occur to you, let's see. Oh, what is considered changing appearance? Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a big question.
Yeah, that's a really big question, and it's a good question. And we determine that based on, considering the barn in question, what are the existing conditions of the barn, and what is the proposed project, and how much will that change the appearance of the barn. So, when we, as preservationists, we are typically reviewing projects against the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are pretty specific about retaining historic fabric whenever possible, respecting character defining features of a property, of a structure or property, so that we have those in the back of our mind. But this barn tax credit program is designed to be a little bit more flexible than that, acknowledging that barns are a threatened resource, and the importance of keeping them in the landscape is primary. So however that happens, we want to facilitate that. It's really a case-by-case review. But if you look closely at the QRE list that I pointed out, it does mention some things that, or the the second list, which is things that are not QRE, things that would disqualify a project, like furring out the full interior of a barn, or removing a hayloft, that would kind of disqualify a project because it would be a drastic and substantial change to the historic appearance of the barn.
All right. So it appears we've had no new questions since that one. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. And if you do think of any questions, Olivia's contact information is in the chat. And you will find the Preservation League's contact information here as well. And thank you, Olivia, for being here today.
Thank you for organizing the webinar, and I'm very happy you all attended, and great questions. And I'm available, so you know where to find me.
Great, thank you so much,
Okay.
And hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.